I'm here poking about in the coat of arms generator in Manorlord. It's time to talk a little bit about Manorlord. I won't play very much of this for reasons that will become clear. Not bad reasons necessarily. Well, they'll become clear, probably. Let's just take a look at this game. It is a city builder type game, or perhaps a town builder, colony builder. It's a Banished-like, let's just put it that way. To start off, you have various options for difficulty modes and whether or not your game will have fighting in it, essentially. There is a combat system in the game as well, which is pretty tangential to the game. We'll probably see it much later. To start with, we're here in a field, and I'm poking at the UI. One of the first things I learned is that our supplies and food are running out. So this is a bad time to be looking at the UI, essentially. I probably could have paused the game to look at all these tooltips. Oh well, our people will be fine. Eventually, I will tell them to do some things that will stop them from dying. And that's where the Banished-like aspect comes in. You start off with a small group of effectively colonists. You're in this random location that you now need to colonize, and you're focused very much around getting food and fuel, at least at first. Here's me taking a look at our people. They're very good looking people. The graphics in this game fall into a category I like to call too good, where I look at the graphics and I almost feel bad because it's like, this is so good, but it's so irrelevant. And I just wonder how much effort went into making it look this good, because, as you'll see after this shot, you'll never see this while playing the game. Not that you can't see it, you just don't, because you tend to be doing something else. The same sort of thing I've ranted about in various games. I did like to see, though, that our people can interact. If you watched my video on Dawn of Man recently, I was complaining that the citizens don't interact. In this game, they do. But aside from that, this is also a Dawn of Man-like. That's the topic of this video. Is it a Banished-like or a Dawn of Man-like? The answer is the first one, but I'm going to be annoying enough that I'll keep contending the second one as well, because it's a game that's like this that I played recently, that old chestnut. Here we're looking at a big map, so this is where we can build our colony. However, you can only build in the corner to start with, because you have to unlock the various other regions, with the added twist that somebody else is also unlocking the other regions and claiming them for themselves. They're not actually building a town, I don't think. They just own that territory, and you might have to fight them for it later. Now here's the standout feature of the game. I really like this random element. The part where, when you make houses and certain other buildings as well, you choose the plot size, and it sort of dynamically snaps to things and can be various shapes and sizes. And while that doesn't really matter, you might think, on the face of it, what it means in the long run is that you end up having a really realistic looking town. That's probably the best way to put it. We'll see that as we go on. But the other thing we'll see, well, right now, is that Manor Lords is a very early access game. And I guess that was unexpected for me for some reason, because I've been following this game's development for so long. Well, I say following, very vaguely keeping astride of it. I kind of guessed that after like 7 years, however long it's been, it must be done or something. So when I heard it was quote-unquote releasing, I came over to take a look with interest, only to discover it's releasing as an early access product. And the big takeaway up front is just to say, it's not done. There's no particular reason to play it now versus waiting for it to be done. So just there we saw shooting past some kind of diplomacy system that pops up right at the start of the game, and it's just really broken looking and doesn't do anything as far as I can tell. There are parts of the game that are like that, and I just think, well, I could play the game with those features in the future. It's not like so legendary or breakthrough in its other design that you need to play this now. Like if you're looking at this, you've probably played this a few times if you've played other Banished-likes or colony builder style city builders, where essentially you make economy buildings and then you assign workers to go and do something in them, and you're just managing the numbers and the flow of goods and logistics, things like that. However, this game does come with various twists, which means in that genre of game, of which there are very many, it's got to be better than most of them. At the very least, it looks better than most of them. Or at the very least, it's going to be better than most of them. Again, the curse of early access is here. Here's one neat feature. Your houses are actually quote-unquote burgages in that they're small holdings, you could say, and they can be developed into cottage industries. So that means your residences can produce things, allowing you to really customize your economy in various ways. So to start with, your level 1 houses could produce vegetables, chickens, or goat hides. And when I set these burgage plots up, in that plot designator thing I was saying is so good, you could have the small holding plot attached to the house be gigantic, and then say like, tell the house to make vegetables, to effectively make a quite large vegetable farm out of your residential buildings. So that's kind of a twist on the usual way that your colony builder game will do its economy. Some things aren't separate to the residence system. There are a couple of points to mention in that it's kind of hard to work out like how much stuff the burgage plots produce. Like you say, I'm going to have this plot produce me eggs. What you can't see is like just a little thing saying like this gives you X eggs per year or something. So it's hard to manage what you should assign to each plot because you don't really know how much you have of each thing other than like looking at the supply and just sort of staring at it and trying to get a gut feeling for whether it's going up or down. Here's me having fun with the plot system, trying to fit a plot in this sort of odd shape I've made because the fields you can put down for farming also use this system. And you could probably do something better than what I'm doing here, but you almost shouldn't. Like, to put this another way, you could come at this from a classic city builder angle and kind of plan everything out, because it's one of these games where everybody's like walking from their workplace to their houses to store locations, things like that. So actually being good at the game is essentially all about putting buildings close together and making sure the roads are in the right place. That's like the thing you need to do. However, with this plot system, you can kind of make buildings in odd shapes and in odd places and squeeze things together weirdly. And what you end up getting is essentially how real-life towns were developed in medieval Europe. We're in Germany or something, guessing, because it says Zweiau at the top. You get a very natural-looking town being developed by having these weird shapes that are fitting in amongst existing tree copses and existing buildings and old roads and things like that. And that's what stands out to me about this game. It feels like you will eventually get a really natural-looking town developing. We'll see a bit of that later on, of course. The other thing I wanted to mention up front, which isn't really to do with this gameplay at all, is that when I first started playing, which was before Early Access actually, this is footage from the beta I should add, so it's all from before the game actually released into Early Access, like the week before, so a similar sort of situation. There was some patch notes or something on the Steam news list that the developer had written that was essentially saying people need to get their heads straight about what this game is, and I kind of agreed with where they were coming from, because I only knew about this game because of hype applied to it on Twitter like years ago, back when I was on Twitter in the dark days. And that hype was all about things like the game's, I don't know, how it was like Mount & Blade or something, or how it was like Total War. And it isn't. And you can tell why people might get the impression that it is, because it kind of has a couple of things that are kind of like those games in some ways, but not really. Obviously, what you're seeing here is what the game is. It's a Banished-like city builder. So the developer put out this message, essentially saying, guys, like, this isn't a Total War game. It's not a military game. It's not Age of Empires. Like, there was some list of things he was saying it's not. And this is clearly because people are expecting something of it, and he probably detected a possible issue with the release of this game, or the release into Early Access, in that people will look at it and be like, wait a second, this isn't the successor to the Total War series that some guy on Twitter was promising me, because that's the impression that I got, like, years back, about what this game was supposed to be developing into. It's totally not, and it clearly was never supposed to be. Like, they've put all of the effort in a completely different direction, one that for some reason, in the conversations about the game, never came up. So, well, I'm speaking from personal experience. I thought, when I installed Manorlord to make this footage, I literally thought it was something like Mount & Blade, like something like that, especially because when the game opens up, the UI is really similar to Mount & Blade Bannerlord's UI and general design. And I was like, oh, okay, it's like a Mount & Blade Bannerlord ripoff or something like that. even though I'd heard about the game, I knew about it being in development for years, I'd seen that plot thing with the burgages, like on Twitter being advertised, and I was like, well, that's pretty neat. But I presumed that was just some real sideshow to whatever the actual game must be, because that's what people were talking about. The reason, probably, is because the game actually does have a quite good battle system in it that's the tangential part, like that's the part that doesn't matter to the overall gameplay. And I don't know, maybe people were just expecting that because they'd made such a good battle system, that must be what the game is about. Not really. It's actually instead a quite good Banished-like. It's like Banished 3 or something. It's got all of the classic features of your colony building, survival style city builder, and then some more features as well. But yes, I think the developer was onto something by trying to engage just before it releases with all of the expectations about the game being wildly different to what the game actually is, or at least there was a perception of that, and I personally was part of the crew that didn't expect the game to be like it is, and like if I'd seen the game for say 5 seconds, that expectation would have been like corrected, but my impression of the game was entirely based on like rumours and hype, and that's probably going to be a problem for the game to some extent. You could imagine it getting negative reviews because it didn't do what people wanted it to do, but the only reason they wanted it is because somebody else had promised something that was never actually going to be in the game. That sort of thing. Maybe there's some issue with that, and this game is made by a single person as well, which means its ambition must be limited by this. Although I think Banished as well was made by a single person, so another argument for this being a Banished-like. Although this single person in this case does have a publisher behind them and money and such, and like a team, I suppose, doing the marketing, who knows. So it's not quite like an indie game. Obviously it's too good to be a solo project entirely, but somebody who's very good at game development is involved at the very core and has perhaps put in tons of directorial intent, and that's why it has a lot of sort of strong features in it. What am I talking about there? I might save such discussions for a real video on Manorlord. Today we're just going through what happened when I started playing Manorlord, and essentially why I stopped playing it, which will come down to, it's a pretty fun game, like the Banished-like formula is good all the time. I remember saying this about Timberborn as well. I was like, well, Timberborn isn't an especially good city builder or colony builder game, but the formula of the colony builder is so good that it doesn't matter. Just the numbers go up games, logistical management games, are just kind of fun because they're quite easy and rewarding. And you're just making a number go up, and it's kind of like you're always making progress, you're always doing something, so it just feels like a nice, rewarding, loopy kind of game to play. And I thought that about Manor Lords. You got me thinking it's Bannerlord again. Again, the similarity to Bannerlord that came up immediately also is in the title and the general theme of the game. Very, very confusing overall. Confusing for somebody who has absolutely no information. I think that's the real problem position for like me coming into this and other people coming into this. Anyway, that information is now available, and what I'm saying is I think this game is good at what it is. It's probably going to be better at what it is than like virtually all other attempts at making games like this. It's really immersive and cool and well made and beautiful and has unique mechanics as well. However, I'm still not going to play it. And why is that? Because I might as well just play it in 3 years, because it will be even better, and there's nothing in the game like right now that must be seen. It is like all of those other games, like this stuff I'm doing. I feel like I've done it before. For example, I recently played Dawn of Man, which is, for all intents and purposes, the same as Manor Lords if we reach a bit at the very least. It's like a Stone Age version of Manor Lords where you're just managing how many trees you've cut down and farming fields, and well, that's about it. Looking at numbers going up, really, just trying to make sure the numbers go up in the correct way and not run out of fuel and food. I've played games like this, including very recently, so I don't know, like it sounds like I'm sort of dumping on Manorlord here for being derivative or something. It's a really good example of that kind of game, but in this genre, there are lots of that kind of game, and they are all very derivative of each other and of Banished, so this shouldn't really be interpreted as a problem per se, because it's what people like, and indeed it's what I like. Again, I have the classic problem that even if I like something, it's physically impossible for me to say that I like it, or to say that I like it in such a way that doesn't make people presume that I am saying the opposite. And this is just a curse of like sarcasm and stuff. You know, I was raised watching like Blackadder and stuff. I don't know how to communicate myself. So, this game's really good, but it's not good enough to make me actually play it. That sounds like a contradiction, but it's actually supposed to not be. I'll come back tomorrow and say something else about this game, so See if in the next clip what I'm saying makes any more sense than this. It's Devin several days later now to talk about the economy. One thing I wanted to note early on is that you don't have that many people in your town, but you do have a lot of stuff that requires people. Basically, we didn't have enough people to do anything. Although this was remedied, I think, during the beta or during the start of early access. Well, we'll see that in a second. Essentially, I've got all these production buildings, I've got storage buildings, we've got logistics buildings, but they don't do anything because we don't have enough people to have anyone employed at them. It's the classic thing where you say each building has so many employees, and you're doing the strategy of trying to have the minimum number of employees doing each thing so you can do the maximum number of things. That kind of gameplay. However, you have so few people that, broadly speaking, a decent chunk of your buildings will just be completely unused most of the time because you don't have people spare. You need to have some people getting food, and you need to have some people doing logistics, or just nothing will happen, and you have to get fuel as well and cut down trees to be able to build things and progress in the game. And that pretty much covers all of our people early on, so we can't do much else. The way the game works is you assign families rather than workers specifically, so it's a bit different. It feels the same in practice, but when you assign a family to do a job, you might get 2 or 3 people doing the job based on how big the family is and how many adults are in the family, that sort of thing. So it's a little bit more vague than the usual worker assigning system, but it fits more thematically at the very least, so that's all good. But I just felt like I needed 2 or 3 times the number of families to be able to do the basics, and later on we'll see that more families will mysteriously show up. You can get more families whenever you want by just adding more houses. They just spawn into houses over time. However, they also require food and fuel, and because I was already using the entire workforce to get food and fuel, I felt that adding more people would just add more need for those things. It wouldn't actually advance if I'd made the population larger. And of course it does cost resources to build houses, so you can't just freely do it. One thing I can do is upgrade the houses we have, and this is me checking out how to do it. You have to meet all of these requirements here. Right now we don't have clothing supplies. So I need to make a tannery, essentially, and have our hunters get some furs, and then you assign somebody to work in the tannery. But we don't have people to do that because we don't have many people, and you always have to keep some people unoccupied, I should also mention, because some of the logistics and building is done by the unemployed families, or all of it, I should say. So you have to keep a certain amount of the population unemployed to keep that part of the economy going as well. Therefore, to get clothes, I was looking here at the trading post. I have assigned one of my precious families to do trading, which you will need to do because it's how you get money, and theoretically we could buy in some clothing supplies from off-map. However, it's extremely expensive. But on the topic of expense, you can see towards the middle top left there's something that says 10. That's your regional wealth. So we've got 10 wealth in the region. In the top right, you can see there's another money indicator, which is your wealth. And much of the stuff in the game is bought using regional wealth, and then a couple of things are bought using your wealth. I'm not quite sure what regional wealth is, and why we control it, and why it is thus different to our wealth. Essentially, you're centrally planning in a sort of medieval kind of way, where while we don't directly control the money that our people have, we can force them to buy things for the town. So I could force the people to spend their money buying clothes from off-map. However, they don't have any money, so I can't. And the reason for that is I'm already forcing them to buy chicken coops and things to help with the economy. So it's kind of like your money in that you're the only person that uses it. They can't spend it without your permission. But, I don't know, it's held separate to your money. What I want is for a political science major to come in the comments and be what is the name of this kind of economy where everyone's allowed to have personal possessions if the overlord lets them, and the overlord tells them when to buy and sell their personal possessions, things like that. I don't know, there's probably some kind of capitalismo, communismo, hyper-feudalism, super economy simulated in the game. It's one of these things where I often complain where oh, it's another city builder with a centrally planned economy. I don't know, I'm sort of dreaming of this private economy city builder. The problem is, it would be no fun whatsoever. As Karl Marx once said, capitalism is no fun. So like you need something to do. So the economy has to be under your control because that's what the game is. But it sort of precludes you making a game that's about a more natural economy of some kind, where the people are just doing what they want to do to some extent. So maybe they would recognize that there's a shortage of eggs and buy their own chicken coops and just set that up on their own, and I wouldn't be deciding to do it. It's a case where, because it is my responsibility, it brings up a question of UI design, and that's another thing that came to mind quite frequently when playing this game. There are lots of UI things I think could be marginally improved. Like, you might note, I'm constantly closing and opening windows because there's loads of information I need to compare simultaneously. Like, whether a building is at a certain level, how many workers another building has, what certain burgage plots are producing. You kind of need to see it all at the same time. Like, what I want is to be able to press a button on the keyboard and an icon would appear over every burgage showing what it produces and what level it is and how many people live there, and an icon would appear over every business showing how many families have been assigned there, because that information in its totality is what you need to make decisions. And I found myself just sort of constantly looking around, like, did I unassign somebody from the logging place? I have to go to the logging place to look. I can't have the map zoomed out and see that there's nobody working there. And then quickly just say, okay, transfer them to the woodcutter instead with one click. Instead, it's a couple of clicks. Just an opportunity to smoothen out the gameplay, I think, because it is so much about microing the economy. At least it appears to me to be about microing the economy. You might as well minimize the number of windows that the stuff you need to see is in, or just put it on the main UI all the time if you're feeling really frisky, but I think just having a button to make it appear would be fine. Something I was thinking about constantly, another UI thing to mention, by the way, is you might have noted in the top right, this picture of me, I guess, my in-game character, is slightly covering the UI. That's because I increased the UI scale a bit. The game offers that option. An option I always like to see, but it's a real bugger to make it actually work correctly. And in this case, there is some overlap. So if you increase the UI scale, it doesn't change the shape of things to make them fit in the chosen UI scale / resolution to the optimal extent, essentially. One of those things where I don't really want to complain because they could have just not offered the option at all. That probably would have been fine. I really like having the option, but yes, it doesn't fully work, I guess. And probably you can't increase the UI scale very much, or you would start to actually lose visibility on certain pieces of information. One other UI thing, actually, while we're here, is that often I found I couldn't work out quickly how much I had of a certain thing. The reason I later realised, after playing for like an hour, was that the numbers in the top right kind of switch between a couple of modes. Sometimes it's like a grouped mode, like it is right here, where it groups your resources into types of things and says the number of that type of thing. So now it's saying I have 52 food, and you can mouse over it to see what you have specifically. In other circumstances, if you watch closely throughout the video, you'll see that menu up there presents your resources differently. I think it's when you're building stuff, it changes to show resources that pertain more to the building system instead of everything else. And sometimes I felt like I had it stuck on one mode or the other. I don't know, I'm half remembering some kind of UI problem I had here. What I want, really, is to have something like in good old Dawn of Man, where you have the option to just have everything be expanded out all the time and see how much you have of everything at all times. Because that would be useful to just have at a glance. It might as well be there instead of being behind a tooltip or something just because you always need to see it. Like at any moment you might need to see it. Why have any steps at all in that process? It's not as if covering the screen up would be a big problem, because you've got lots of screen and it's just not the kind of game where you need really wide fields of vision or anything like that. Anyway, what am I doing here? Here's a neat system in the game that's actually so important that I think it's too important. Well, I'll try to explain that. You can level up your town by getting certain numbers of people at certain housing levels. This unlocks all kinds of perks, and obviously I didn't explore that perk tree very fully, because as you'll see I ultimately didn't play the game that much. But the impression I got is that while you kind of have 4 directions you can go in the perk tree, some of the perks in there are so important and are so powerful that you kind of don't have a choice, really. And also a lot of the perks in there were things where I was like, I kind of just wish I had that in the beginning. Like, I thought it would be more fun to be able to use some of the stuff you can unlock through the perk tree right away. I think it's because there were so many useful things, like being able to plow, for example, and there was one which gives you infinite resources from mines, and I was just like, that's so important to get. Like, that would make such a big difference that I kind of have to do it. And I feel like I have to pass over other things that I also wanted. Like, there was one unlock you could get early in the tree to let you farm bees. And if you saw my Dawn of Man commentary, I was complaining in Dawn of Man that it didn't let you farm bees. In this game you can, but it's an unlock, and it's an unlock you can only get if you sort of pass over getting other more useful things, like ploughing your fields, which is like so economically useful that there's just no way you could go without it, that sort of thing. Especially because we lack workers, I want any perk that makes the economy more efficient, so anything that lets me get more animals and tools that produce more, that's basically essential right now. The other thing to mention, another thing to mention, is that it's winter, and this is a classic survival city builder game where you need to not die during the winter when you don't have a food supply, so you build up your food and fuel supplies, and then try not to die. Also, I believe during the winter your fuel goes down twice as fast or something, so you need more than it says you have. What I don't know is whether this is taken into account. Like, up at the top, next to where it says Zweiau, it says 6. That means you have 6 months of stuff in storage. But during winter, because you use the fuel twice as fast, you theoretically have less fuel than it says you does. I don't know if that's being factored in. Well, anyway, if we have 6 months of stuff, then this winter at least is gonna be fine, so we don't have to worry about that. What we don't have is an operational farming economy, so ideally you want to have 1 year of stuff in storage, basically, because it might be a year until you get more stuff if you're farming stuff on a yearly basis. But because our economy is based entirely on eating berries foraged from the woods, we kind of don't have to worry about that so much. So not having many supplies is okay, because the berries will grow back sooner rather than later. That's something, isn't it? And you can sort of spec into being hunter-gatherers rather than farmers in the town upgrade tree, I think. I don't know, I just felt like you probably shouldn't do that, not quite sure. I think the only issue I had with these like balancing questions is that I wanted to have all of the options. Like, I wanted it to be a bit more sandboxy, I guess. I don't want to have to unlock certain things because I felt like I should be able to do anything I can afford to do and not have this kind of perk tree. I don't know, like, what is a perk tree in real life? Why can't we get bees? Why do I have to get a perk for that? I don't know what it's like being in the nobility, but anyone who's a descendant of a noble, please let me know. Do you have a perk tree? And do you have to unlock bees in your life? Or is it possible to just sort of buy in some bees from off-map? I don't know. I felt like maybe there should be a way for our people to get some of the techs, which you have to unlock through the perks. It's just for fun, is the answer to my questions, but I sort of thought maybe it'd be more fun if everything was there and I just had to be able to afford it and have the space and have the willpower and have the desire to do it. I wanted to do things that I wanted, and other pointless things to say, and it just felt like, because I kind of felt like I should do certain things because of that perk tree really limiting what you can unlock, especially early on, I felt like I couldn't do some of the things I wanted to do in Manorlord. But all of that isn't very important. The only really important thing is actually just the economic problems, like I don't have enough people to do anything, so it wouldn't matter if I unlocked the ability to farm bees. There are no people to farm bees, so that's out the window. One other way to put it, I guess, that might get my problem across a bit better, is that when I'm saying, like, you can unlock bees, what you're realistically doing is locking bees by getting something else. So that's how it felt to me. Like, you take one perk, and because you very rarely get perk points, and there are so many you could have chosen from, you're kind of locking off all the other options. So it feels like you're seeing the game shrink before your eyes, because it's like, okay, I guess I'm not going to be getting all of that stuff that I could have got. I don't know, the game's showing you, like, we do have bee farming, but I'm here watching bee farming go away, as I'm like, well, I guess I should get the ability to buy food from off-map, because that's going to be more useful when I run out of berries or something. I don't know. With proper planning and with expert gameplay, maybe you can get most of the tree, and these worries of mine would go away, but all I can comment on is what I was worrying about when playing it for the first time, and perhaps that's the most important thing the developers want to hear as well. I felt like the game was shrinking, as I said, because it looks like you weren't going to get to play with most of the stuff in the game in any given town, because you're speccing into doing certain things. Now we're going to look at something I got wrong, and I remember thinking, after I realised I got this wrong, that was stupid of me, but now looking at the footage of me getting it wrong, I was like, no, this was a pretty reasonable mistake to make. First, a message pops up saying raiders near, and we have a new goal to prepare for an attack in a year. So I was like, okay, what do we do about that? Well, first another thing pops up saying a ruler's army has been sighted. And of course the mistake I made here was thinking that we would have to fight this group, since it was pointed out to me at the same time as it said some raiders are coming. These aren't the raiders, and that's a good thing, because essentially when I was looking at this group I was thinking there is absolutely no way our village can defeat this band of soldiers. There's like 100 of them, we've only got 30 people if you include the children and stuff, so I was thinking, is there any way for me to become powerful enough to fend off that force? Like, we need a village with something along the lines of 300 people to be able to put out 100 troops. And we need to be able to manufacture weapons and armor as well to give to soldiers. You start off with 20 spears and 20 shields, but we don't have 20 men even. So with that in the background, I just sort of decided to play the next year and resigned myself to my fate. I thought, well, we'll probably die. Maybe we'll get enough money for some mercenaries or something. In the meantime, we need to desperately get some more people. I also need to upgrade my houses to level up the town to get more perks. I think upgraded houses also have more people in them. The issue I have right now is, well, there are certain parts of the economy that aren't really obvious in the build menu. That's what I'm looking for here. I need to have taverns supplying ale to my houses. And I could work out how to get a tavern and how to get malt, which is like the preliminary ingredient to ale. I think you can farm barley, make a malt house to make malt, and then you need something else to make ale, and then tavern is available already as the final step in the process. And I think the confusion here is that the third step in the process, the brewery stage, is an upgrade of a house rather than a separate building. So this is a possible UI concern where a decent amount of the economy is only in house upgrades rather than being in the building menu. So at a glance you can't really see what you need to do things. You kind of just have to know about it already, which is why it's probably very unobvious to the developer perhaps that this would be an issue a new player might think about. To me, I didn't know how to do the get the tavern stage of upgrading the houses because I didn't know how to get a brewery, and I think it's because you have to have a level 2 house and upgrade it into a brewery. But again, I'm actually still not quite sure thinking back on it. There's some way to do it, I think, anyway. I started slapping down more burgages because I thought we just need more people, so we'll wait and see what comes of that. In the meantime, somebody is claiming the territory next to me. You can gain this currency influence, and you use that to buy more territories to build in, and of course you can see the territories come with various resources. Almost certainly you'll need to have a few different colonies across the map to get all of the resources to do everything in the game. But what I actually don't know is how you get influence. I never really worked out what it was I was supposed to be doing to progress towards unlocking the other areas. But I also don't really need the other areas right now, so I was happy to just not know, but I don't know, just so the developer knows. I didn't know whatever this thing was. Was I supposed to know towards the beginning? Who knows? At least I think I know what I don't know, and that's a start to working out what's going on, isn't it? Question mark. The real issue is lack of people, as usual. One thing to note is that in the top left you can see it says we have one free family, 12 families doing something, and then it says 17 houses. What I'm not sure about is whether that means you have 17 families and some of them don't work, or whether you could have 17 families, or is it you have 17 burgages and each one could contain a number of families. I think the different levels of burgages might have different numbers of families in them, or you can upgrade burgages that have space on their plot to house another family in a smaller house. And I don't know if that increases your potential family count. I guess what I wanted is a slightly simplified number up there, where it's just like, this is how many workers you have, like this is how many game pieces you have, how many things that you control that you have. And not have it be like, here's how much space you have, or here's how many you could have at some point in the future, or the more abstract thing like your population, which sort of doesn't really play into things so much. Like I have 46 people, but I only have 18 pieces to play with, but each piece is worth a certain number of people, and they're not all quite the same. And it might even matter for you to be putting people into workplaces that are near where they live. But I don't think you can really see where that sort of stuff is and micro it at all. You're probably not supposed to, but it's one of these things where it would be a huge multiplier on your productivity to have people not have to walk very far in games like this. It always is. So while you might be like, well, that's an unnecessary optimization or something, yeah, but it's an optimization that increases your productivity by like 5-fold. So it's so important to be able to do it if you can. There's sort of awareness that it's going wrong is annoying for me the whole time. Also, potentially, on the awareness topic, you can see I've got various vegetable gardens around the place. Vegetable gardens require labour to run, unlike chickens and goats, I think, as the alternative level 1 burgage plot uses. I don't know if that's the reason for the discrepancy between how many people I have available to assign to other labour and how many people there are. Possibly anyway. But the other main thing I wanted to say is that I wasn't sure how big to make the burgage plots throughout my time playing the game, because if you make a tiny plot and assign it to chickens, it costs the same amount as making a gigantic plot and assigning it to chickens. And you kind of think, well, if I made it a bigger plot, that means there'll be more chickens. But then, because it costs the same amount and doesn't cost any labour either way, I kind of thought maybe it doesn't. Like, is it more gamey? Like, it's just how many burgages assigned to chickens you have determines your chicken economy? Or does the size of the plot matter? I shouldn't have to be asking these questions, and this is a classic complaint with economy micromanagement games. There's usually some quite simple information you need to do the gameplay here, and you don't get it, and in many cases that's by design. You're supposed to just kind of be guessing your economy, but I guess I just find that less interesting, because, like right now, how many eggs does our village produce per year? I have no idea. Is it at all impacted by the size of the burgage plots? I have no idea. And it would be a very simple UI situation for me to not have no idea, and as a result, be doing more gameplay with the ideas about how my economy is working. I can't be like, I'm excited to add the next thing, because I have no clue what the next thing should be. I don't know what we lack, other than just by like guessing. So like watching what economy stuff we have in the inventory and being like, well, I guess that could be higher. I don't know. Like, I don't know how many eggs I need or how many I'm producing or what the relationship between the producers and the output is. It's pure guesswork. And this is a game that I thought was quite bad in that regard. Like, most city builders with economy management will have this kind of problem, and I will complain about it. They'll have the problem to the extent that I will complain about it, that's what I'm saying. But this game seemed to have it a lot. Like, it was pure guesswork. I didn't even have like a basic chart providing information that wasn't enough, and I would say this is the wrong information on this chart. We just don't have anything, so very much guessing like how big to make the farm fields, how many people need to farm during the year, and just everything essentially, which feels less satisfying than an economy you're sort of doing something with and like you can have a plan for. As an example of a game that does get that sort of thing right, well, the only one that comes to mind is Frostpunk, although I think the reason it's coming to mind is because in the next clip there's snow on the ground and I can see it on the timeline on the screen down there. Well, in Frostpunk you can look up the exact like per minute production of all of your resources and how much you're using, so you can actually be really precise. And I enjoyed playing through Frostpunk on like the maximum difficulty, where it's really difficult to manage the economy, but it can be done, and the only reason it can be done is because you have all of the numbers all of the time. You can micro things really tightly and pull off economic strategies of a sort. Well, anyway, here we're in the opposite kind of world where we're just kind of doing stuff and hoping for the best. What I'm hoping for right now is that all of the grain we harvested will be turned into bread as we hit winter, and we're now quite low on food because I've expanded the population so much, which in turn I felt I had to do, both because we didn't have enough families to do pretty much anything, and we're going to be attacked, so I thought I have to make the village bigger quickly so we have more militia to hire. And it all spirals down. Now we have no food, and what I don't know is how to make more food. Like, I've got the buttons I can press to do it, but I don't know if the people will do it, or if they're doing it efficiently. So in this case, for example, we've got the grain stored somewhere, like in the village. We've got a granary, and sometimes people were storing things in the granary, sometimes they store it in the farmhouse. What I wanted them to do was store it in the windmill, ideally, but it's not that simple, I don't think. What I believe must be happening is our people are walking backwards and forwards between the granary and the windmill, and because they're not next to each other, that's going to be a problem for me. However, at the same time, the granary is where finished goods go, so it needs to be near the marketplace. So like your berries and your bread go to the granary, and then they're taken from the granary to the marketplace to be sold. So we've messed things up to some extent logistically, and you might be thinking, What are you talking about? And, well, indeed, on the screen, nothing is happening pertaining to what I'm talking about, but I think what I'm talking about is actually happening in the background. You can't tell how inefficient your economy is due to its logistical issues, because that needs to be something the UI focuses on, and you need to be able to see things to do with it in order to start making judgments. I'm guessing that I'm in trouble because my buildings aren't adjacent to each other. And this might matter a small amount, it might matter a large amount, we don't know. Like, it could be the case that it's tripling the time to make bread because people have to walk up and down the road a couple of times in the process of doing it. It depends on how each unit of bread, or how long each unit of bread takes to make versus the travel time and stuff. I'm already going into like a sort of a nerd spiral, just thinking about how this economy could be more efficient if I knew and if I could control things more. I was complaining earlier that games have too much central planning. Now I'm coming from the other direction. There is not enough central planning. My people have too much free will. They're like walking around and things. We need trains. We need a fully automated, luxury, centrally planned communist economy where I can make sure it's maximally efficient. We're going to play on expert difficulty and make sure we have exactly the amount of resources we need. 100% efficiency, nothing wasted. It's going to be perfect. I'm a very ambitious medieval lord in that way. Instead, all I can do is tell households to please make food. They might do it. I don't know if I have enough assigned to do it, to make food fast enough. And there are other issues. For example, if you assign one family to mill grain, which might be what I have right now, the one member of that family who's like old enough to actually do the work might be eating or going to get a drink. And because, like, in-game, that takes, like, a week or something because they're walking across the map to do it, the thing isn't operating for a while at a critical time. And it's hard to know, I guess. Like, all this stuff I'm saying, it just sounds like speculation. The developer probably knows the answer to this, but I'm saying that as the player, I didn't know, and I was worried that I didn't know, and I think it actually is a gameplay problem that I didn't know as well. My solution, as you might have noted just there, was to tell the people to stop eating food. You do have the ability to activate certain policies, like passive buffs in the background, one of them being that you get reduced food consumption in exchange for reduced approval rate, which in effect means reduced population growth, but we don't want population growth. Here's something that I bought from the perk tree, the food cart, which supposedly allows your people to buy food from off-map. I mentioned this before. What it doesn't appear to be doing is functioning. It just says it's abandoned in the corner. Theoretically, my people could buy food to get through the winter. They do have some money as well. I don't know if they have enough or just how it works in general. It wasn't working out, I guess, or at least it looks like it isn't working. It probably actually is working. Who knows? I also wanted to add that despite me complaining heavily about the economy here, I didn't really worry about it that much when I was playing. I guess because I was playing in a very laissez-faire sort of way, like I just didn't really care whether my people died because I knew I was probably going to stop after seeing how early accessy the game was. So it does have the standard fun, that's what I wanted to say. Like, it's still fine to kind of run the economy in this vague way. There's still fun to be had. It's just that for me personally, there's less fun than doing it in a more precise way, or having the option to do it in a more precise way if you want to. It felt a little bit vague, but such is this genre, basically. It's kind of normal for it to be like this, so this isn't the most damning criticism, even though I'm harping on about it quite a lot. We did survive the winter, now we need to survive this raid that's been much hyped up, and as I implied earlier, it's going to be much easier than I thought it was going to be. I was like, well, this is the end of the game, like I'm just going to die now because 100 guys are going to come and kill me. We only have 25 guys. Luckily, this bandit raid thing was separate to the other armies walking about the map. They just kind of walk about sometimes and otherwise don't bother us. So here's the fight we need to worry about. In they come. It's a bunch of brigands who charge across this little stream and enter into melee against us. It shows you well in advance where the enemies are going to come from, so I was well prepared to receive them. We've got our guys in some kind of defensive formation. I was kind of hoping to use this stream, but I wasn't quite standing in the right place really. Maybe there's some sort of hill or height advantage. The game doesn't communicate such things, so I'm not quite sure what's going on in terms of the behind the scenes numbers. But you can probably tell it's something like Total War's combat, and that's where all of that hype I was talking about earlier must have come from. People seeing this and being like, wait a second, this looks better than Total War. And that's the interesting thing. This one-man show actually has created a more convincing portrayal of melee combat between groups than Total War has, which has been criticised constantly for getting it wrong. And here we have something better. It still doesn't quite stand up to scrutiny. Like, if you look at individual guys, they're not really doing anything particularly convincing, but as a broad show it looks better than the extremely weird melee systems you'll see in something like Total War Rome 2. I think it's because the animations, while they're often still like matched combat animations, they're really short and realistic and plausible animations, which just helps out with easing the problems with how weird such a system looks. I think it's just sheer better quality in terms of the animation that's making it look better rather than anything particularly different about the model of how it's working. At least that's how it seems to me. In terms of gameplay, there's nothing for me to do because I don't have any free units, but you could imagine if you had a lot more guys, we could do some tactics or something, but because this fight is just going to be us standing here fighting those guys, and that's about that, all I can do is wait and hope we win. We have the advantage because we have shields and many of the enemies don't, and, well, probably the early game enemies are supposed to be easily defeated by your levies, otherwise the game would be impossible. So in the meta sense, we already know that we should win this fight, and we can just wait until that happens. And a while later, we've beat the enemy into a pulp and we win. Then we disband our forces, they go back to their jobs and go home. We did lose a couple of guys, so that will impact our workforce a bit. The main thing though, in terms of the economy, was I wanted to pick up the weapons on the ground because you need weapons and shields and armor to be able to deploy troops. Now that there are some like on the floor, I really need to drag those back and put them into storage ideally. Maybe someone will do it automatically at some point, like an unemployed family. I wasn't paying close enough attention, but that was just something I was thinking about. It would be nice to be like, can we bring all of this stuff back with us on the way back? Don't just leave the battlefield. We need that stuff. At the very least, we could sell it for money. Now with that problem dealt with, we go back to the original, the classic problem. Why don't we have any food? The situation right now is we have loads of grain and loads of flour, but we don't have any food. Even though I've got the bread oven maximally staffed, which is pretty rare, like most of our things will only have 1 or 2 families in them, with the exception of our food production industries, because that's what we really need. And it's still not enough, which is surprising. Like, our town isn't that big, but we've already got enough food demand that we can't keep up with it with like maxing out the single buildings we have producing it. Obviously I can just make a second bread oven and have more than 3 families working on making bread. It just feels like it shouldn't be this many people working on it, I don't know. And again, maybe there's some sort of logistical problem that's causing the issue in the background. It's very hard to say. So we're back to the daily grind, literally in the sense of the windmill. And well, the thing to mention, I think, is that battle system we saw very briefly shot past, and I was saying earlier about how the game was hyped on the basis of having this battle system, and we see there how tangential it is, as I was putting it before. It would be the same game if that wasn't there at all. Like, it doesn't really impact what you're doing for the vast majority of the time. At least it didn't in the experience that I had, which was just the beginning of the game. Well, I wanted to talk a bit more about that, but first, let me mention this. In this next clip, we suddenly have more people, and it's saying I have homeless people, even though I wasn't building more burgages. The reason is, I was playing this in early access, or in the beta actually, so technically before early access, like a couple of days before this was. And it was being patched constantly, and I presume that one of the patches made it so that you get more people, because the complaint I was having, I'm going to guess, was also affecting other people, that being that you can build out this economy, but you can't use it because you don't have enough people to staff all of the buildings. So all of your stuff is just like unused most of the time, or at least it's barely used. Like, if you are using something, you're using it to the minimum possible extent because you don't have enough families. So they did something such that you have 5 other base families. This is much needed as far as I'm concerned, because now there's more stuff to do in the game. You're less just sat there looking at empty buildings that can't be used for anything. A good idea. Here's another issue I was having here. I need to make 5 houses, or 5 burgage plots, to have the 5 families be housed. And it brings up the issue that you can see I'm doing all these sort of shapes with the burgage plotting thing, looking for the one that I want. And I guess what I need is to be able to have one extra control, to be able to say, in the shape that I'm drawing, please put 5 plots. Because it would be nice to be able to customize this, because maybe you want your entire plot to only be 1 burgage because you're just going to have like a gigantic vegetable farm there. Or maybe you want the plot you're drawing to be like 10 burgages with no garden space because you just want residential housing. You're not going to use it for anything. So it would be nice to choose. The game itself decides how many burgages it's going to put in the plot you make based on its size and its shape in some way. You might as well let that be the player's choice as well, if they want, or just have it be like a tick box to be automatic if they don't care. That sort of thing, because it would be nice to choose that. But again, because I don't actually know whether it matters how big the burgage plots are, I'm not sure how much to complain about that. Like, I'm not sure how mad to be that I couldn't make 1 gigantic burgage plot, because maybe that wouldn't even do anything in the game. I don't know. Now, the other thing I wanted to say about the already shot past battle system is that I think this thing I'm saying where it was like developing hype on Twitter or whatever, where people were seeing this and being like, yes, there's promise here. I think the game actually should pivot to be more about that, because that combat system I saw, while it was like not used very much in this case because it was just 2 units fighting each other, it was still better at portraying 2 units fighting each other than the big franchise known for doing it, Total War, which has 300 people working on it, that sort of thing. So the very idea, the nub, that we've already got something that looks like it's better than the professional big league stuff means that this really is promise. And I've been vaguely following all of the inside information coming out of Creative Assembly, the makers of Total War, and basically it looks like they have so many technical problems that they're kind of out of the game. Like the age of game innovation and technological innovation that Creative Assembly might have been part of in the past is long since gone. They can't make anything better than what they have now, and for financial reasons, they're kind of just stuck producing the same game over and over again, which you've probably noticed them doing if you've been playing that franchise since Total War Rome 2. For technical reasons, they actually can't make it better. It's not just like, oh, they're being greedy, they're being lazy. It's not possible to make their engine better because it's broken for technical reasons. And it would take them a lot of time and money. They would have to start again, essentially, if they wanted to make something better than that. So now we should focus onto Manor Lords, where we have something that's already better than that. Like at its first step, this foundation stone towers above already the gigantic messy pile that Creative Assembly made. This is a bit of a reach because we've only seen 2 small units fighting each other, but I'm willing to make that reach, and I think that's where the hype was coming from. Just the idea that somebody else would be picking up this torch and trying to make something that vaguely simulates melee battles is exciting, because if you've been following the insider info, it's going to be 10 years at least before Creative Assembly has any chance to innovate their own thing that they've got and use their tech or develop their tech, and they're probably not even going to do it. They've probably reached the peak of their technology in this regard. So the idea that somebody else now has a similar tech and they might actually do something more interesting with it is exciting. And you know what? We have to be extremely honest here. It is more exciting than what the actual game is. So the actual city builder is normal. You know, it's derivative, I guess, but I don't really mean that as an insult. It's exactly what you'd expect. It's just all the stuff that this genre does. But that little battle system on the side is an exciting stride in a different genre that, as I said, is tangential to this game. It doesn't really matter. The game would be the same if it wasn't there. But that's so good. That little stride they've made onto uncharted territory is like where loads of people are waiting for the territory to be charted. So, I don't know. I'm not quite sure what I'm saying. I really like what they have done with the city builder stuff. And I sort of think, what could they have done if they had seized upon this battle system they've made like a couple of years back in development and changed the direction of the game to be more about that? Would the game ultimately be better if it actually was more of a strategy game? I talked about the developers putting out this post to talk about how it's not a strategy game, it's not a war game, it's not a conquest game, it's not like Mount & Blade, it's not like Total War. Well, all I can say is, yeah, but what if it was? Because what you've got here is actually a pretty good basis for making a game that is like that. So at the very least, consider it for the next game, please. Like, if you own the intellectual property, you own this technology, you own this code. Other companies tend not to be able to make this sort of thing. And the big company that has achieved this in the past, appears to have messed it up, and now they can't innovate and change it because it got too complicated and nobody who knows how it works there anymore, and it's all just a big mess, that sort of thing. Well, I'm going to point at you, Manor Lords, and be like, Manor Lords 2 actually should be like Mount & Blade Bannerlord 2, that sort of thing. Maybe you should try and lean into the hype. This is like a 10-year project I'm proposing, but I'm guessing that the single developer who made this is going to make an enormous amount of money off this project, so if they were willing to come back into the game dev scene, they probably actually could start a studio of their own, lead it themselves, and direct a game that is a successor to Manor Lords that kind of leans more into the hype that the original idea of Manor Lords was picking up, and make the thing that people were dreaming of, which is essentially some kind of medieval Total War 3-like game, the thing that CA have been unable to do, or at least are unwilling to do, perhaps because they suspect people will ultimately be disappointed with it. It looks like Manorlord has the resources, has the code it needs to do what people actually do want from it. And just the sheer impact of having new ideas and new people working on it will probably produce something that takes people pleasantly by surprise and is surprisingly good, which is also the case for Manor Lords. It is surprisingly good at what it is, it's just that it invokes the idea of a much harder to make and much more interesting game that is sort of more unique in its genre, or less derivative, you could say. Well, for what it is, it's still pretty good. However, what we need to get to in this commentary is why I'm not going to play it despite all of this, which I've pretty much already explained, but in order to have some sort of vague conclusion to this video, let's get to a point where I explain it some more. Although actually, one thing I'll say before we move on truly, is that if you take a look at my town right here, the thing I was prophesizing about earlier is coming true. The kinds of town or kinds of village you make in this game are really natural looking, and that's really cool. That's one of the things that allows this game to stand above its rivals in the genre, because while in terms of like what you do, in terms of the gameplay, it's kind of the same as everything else, it's still cooler. The town you make is more real, it looks more real at least, it's more natural, that's the way I wanted to put it. It's kind of like how a town would develop if it was being haphazardly built by different groups over time and stuff was just being fit into general spaces, or was trying to take advantage of soil fertility and things, didn't have much tech to kind of renovate the land, they were fitting around nature. I like the way that this muddy, hovel-ridden village I've made looks. It's a very realistic, muddy, hovel-ridden village, and it's my hovel-ridden village. I love my people. At the very least, I love them because I think I can start taxing them now. What you had to do was build your own house in the village, which I mentioned, and it's there somewhere as one of the hovels. It wasn't a very good house. And then you can tax people very slightly to make money, and you can see in the top right, I now have 23 gold coins from this enterprise I've been running, so clearly something good has happened. The other thing to note up there actually, which I just remembered, is that I've got 1,000 influence points. You originally only got 250 influence points for building your house. That's how I had some influence before, and I believe that patch that changed it so you have more people also changed it so you have more influence. What I think this means is that earlier on in the game, you would be able to buy a second territory and start a second colony, and then there's a building you use to transfer resources between them. I'm not a huge fan of city builder games that make you build a second city alongside the first one. I've ranted about this in various city builder videos. I prefer it to be one continuous process of your single settlement getting bigger and bigger and bigger and turning into a huge city, so I'd rather it work in that way. Maybe it does, I didn't even try it, but I'm just throwing this criticism out there in case that's how the game works. I would rather not build a separate colony and a separate economy in the different regions. I just want my thing to sprawl over all of the regions, and for all of the UI considerations to treat all of this as one town with one economy. Anyway, actually moving on this time. Here we are, a bit later. This is basically the end of my playthrough, and we'll see it's a very anticlimactic end. I was just doing the stuff still. I'm planning out this system where I'll have this central marketplace that has plenty of space to expand, where I'll have all of my industrial houses in like a square, so that I know where they are essentially at a glance and can go and find them later. And then we'll build the residential and farming style houses around it, and of course the real farms out in the fertile bit of land that's next to the village. You can see we've got many fields going at the moment, and there actually was a problem here, because You can see at the top I only have 2 months of food. I figured that was because I haven't processed my grain into flour and that things would be fine. What actually happened, although I'm not sure about this, is we failed the harvest. I believe the case is because the crops are on crop rotation mode and the big main field is rotating into fallow. The people went out and they cut down all the wheat growing in it and didn't store it because they were converting it to a fallow field. And that requires you to get rid of whatever's growing in it already. And for some reason this sort of overwrote the harvest of the wheat. I don't know about that. I'm accusing there of being a massive glitch there, and that's why I didn't get any food. Maybe I messed up the crop rotation system in some way, and deliberately told my people to not harvest the wheat and just destroy it, make the field go fallow. Well, there's some idea there where you would have the field go fallow every other year or something to make it become more fertile, and you get more crops next time as a result. And having multiple fields allows you to do that in rotation. So with crop rotation, you can still get the same amount of crops, but you'll get the fertility bonus over time. All of that doesn't matter to me, because I'm just sitting here being like, well, it's happening again for some reason. Now we have to have another winter with no food, and I'm considering here what we can do with external trade. Our village is much richer than it was before, so theoretically we can buy in food, especially if that thing where you can buy in food from off-map with the food carts would work, or I would work out how to make it work, I don't know. All of this ultimately doesn't matter, because we never got to winter. I quit the game, came back the next day, and the town is gone. So I guess that's worse than the wheat being gone, isn't it? Now, the entire town's gone. I accidentally rotated the town to fallow, and everybody dutifully unalived themselves, so that's the end of that. I think what actually happened, of course, is because I was playing this as it was releasing into early access. This might have even been on the day it was releasing into early access. New versions were coming out, and I guess at some point the old saves became incompatible, and hence they don't appear in the menu. So for that reason, my town's gone, and that's just the trigger behind why I stopped playing Manor Lords, because as it was coming out, the stuff I did already was gone, and while we jumped through it a bit, I did spend a decent amount of time making that previous town, and I kind of had plans and stuff, and it was just disappointing to not be able to play on with it, so I thought, well, I might as well just not start again, for the simple reason that this is an early access game. I'm getting the worst possible Manor Lords experience right now, and because this game has promise, I don't want that. I'm going to treat myself to not playing the worst possible version of the game. Let's be generous. Let's live in a better world where we play good versions of games. And for that, unfortunately, I'm going to have to just come back in a certain amount of time. I mean, it took 7 years to get this far, so unless they're going to use the money from early access to hire people to work on the game, then I don't know how long I'll have to wait. This feels like another Star Sector, where I came in something like 8 years into development, or 10 years into development, and I was like, this game seems unfinished, and indeed they were still working on it, and I thought the way they were working on it was making the game worse, but that's a side point. I guess the point here is, that's the end of Manor Lords, because you and I might as well play this game another time. It's not so breakthrough and revolutionary that you have to play it in its early access state. Like, in that early access game, there's nothing particularly amazing where it's like you have to play this instead of another city builder or another medieval colony builder, which is like a really saturated genre unto itself. I was to some extent a victim of the very hype the developers were trying to deflate, because I expected more. I didn't have any specific expectations, just that this was going to be a revolutionary breakthrough game of some kind, and it feels like it does have the pieces in there. It's just sort of breaking through in a not particularly revolutionary direction. It's just being a really good example of a game that I've played 10,000 times already. And it's better than those other ones, I guess, and it's probably going to end up being even better. But still, there's no need to play it right now. I think that's what I'm saying. Now, this clip I included here because, well, basically after that save deletion thing, I was really annoyed because over time I've been stung by playing early access games so many times. And I was like, right, I'm just getting out of here. I'm just going to play another game. So this happened right after I saw that save was gone. I was like, I'm going to play the next thing on my list. It's Nebulous Fleet Command, which was from the same publisher. Maybe that was why it was next on my list. So the same company produced this other game, which I'd been waiting to play for ages. I opened it up. It immediately hits you with this message saying, oh, sorry, this game's in early access, and, it doesn't have any content. And indeed, Nebulous has much less content than Manor Lords. So I don't know, I was just being absolutely hammered on this particular day of gaming, getting annihilated by early access games. And I've been stung so many times, like over the last couple of years, I've really lost all tolerance for this idea of early access. Every time I see a game that I like the look of, it's in early access, and I keep accidentally playing games, like going into my backlog, being like, this is an interesting looking thing, and then discovering it's early access, which is what happened right here with Nebulous. I didn't know it was going to be early access, and then was just disappointed. And I'll make another short video on this, because this is another disappointing game, where it's like, it looks like it's going to be really good, and then it's early access, so you just have to wait. Like, it'll be good later, it'll be good if you play it in 5 years. Okay, well, why do I have it now? Why did I buy this? I don't understand. Like, what was I doing to myself? Why is this on the shelf available for purchase if you just might as well not buy it? And it's a similar thing with loads of games, especially in the medieval-style colony builder genre. I feel like over the last couple of years, I've gone through loads of games like on my Steam wishlist where they were basically like Manor Lords, but with a lower production value, and I was interested in playing them because I like this gameplay format, I like this archetype. It's just that people don't finish these games. I don't know. I don't have any examples that come to mind, I guess apart from Timberborn, which I did play on this channel. There are loads of games that are mechanically like this, and in terms of the thought process are like this, like Manor Lords, but have something missing or are very in your face with a problem that is supposedly going to be solved in the future. And Manor Lords now joins that pile, I guess. It only joins it at the top. That's the nice thing to mention. It joins it with such promise that if we can get Manor Lords done, we don't have to worry about the 10 million other indie medieval colony builder Banished-likes out there. So it's exciting for that reason, but it's potentially not exciting for what it doesn't do with its really cool mechanics. Like, I don't know what they could do. Like, I don't have a particular idea to push for here, but if it could somehow be more different to other games, that would be useful. And the warfare system they've started off with is a potential angle to go for with that. Well, again, all I can do is repeat my final claim. It feels very familiar, but it feels better than similar things I've played that are supposed to be the same kind of game. So because of that, it's nice. There are tons of like UI changes and balancing changes you could go through with this game, but we'll just let them all off the hook because it's in early access. The developers haven't formally committed to any particular balance or UI conventions or something. So we can just be like, well, we'll come back later. I'll let them use the early access shield because I'm feeling generous. Usually I prefer to say that if you sell something as a product, it's on the shelf, it's fully subject to criticism. Early access doesn't count, effectively, because you chose to not release the full game. You don't get any free points, because from the point of view of the consumers, that's bad. Like, we're not going to give you extra points for that and be less harsh on the game because of it. But now, I'm tired. You defeated me, Manor Lords. The curse of early access has struck me so many times. I'm just lying on the floor, like beaten into a pulp by so many unfinished gameplay experiences, by so many unbalanced experiences, and by so many comments saying they'll fix it in the next patch, that all I can do is cry and be like, well, I guess I just don't deserve to play a finished game. I don't deserve a complete, curated experience designed for maximum fun, because they haven't finished it yet. But, you know, we've got the product here that they might make that in at some point. And, well, luckily, I actually didn't pay to get in here because I had the preview build of the game, so I can't complain too much. Although I actually did, just a minute ago, go and look at the Steam reviews, because I remembered this game was out. I wanted to see, has anyone else got any complaints that I also leveled in this video? And it was at something like 80% or a high 80% reviews on Steam. So people seem to like it a decent amount. People just saying like, yeah, it's a pretty good medieval city builder. And some people were giving it negative reviews saying it doesn't match the hype, like it's not what I expected, but not really very much of that. Actually, the positive and negative reviews all focused around this final thing that I've been talking about today as I record, the early access thing. The good reviews were saying like, this is good for an early access game. So like, I'm guessing a lot of people in this genre or interested in this sort of game have also been stung by the curse of early access. So people come in and be like, yeah, this is pretty complete, it's pretty far along for something that's in early access. And then the negative reviews are saying, it's an early access game, it's unbalanced, it's obviously unfinished, there are like weird tooltips that are broken all over the place, it's just not polished enough. And indeed, I think that's perfectly valid. So maybe this whole thing I was talking about at the beginning with the expectations and the hype cycle wasn't so much of a big deal, because I didn't really see people talking about that. I did see people saying like, well, it's not the amazing game people say it is, but it is still quite good, which I think is also my sentiment here. And my other sentiment is also, but it's early access, so you might as well not play it, which was the sentiment behind a lot of the negative reviews, or just saying there's something wrong with it and potentially citing early access as the reason behind there being something wrong with it. And indeed, that may be the case. So the takeaway message is, here's a pretty good game that you could probably play a better version of if you just don't play it now. And because there's no particular reason to play it now, like it's not an amazing, like standout, mind-blowing example of this kind of gameplay, it's just a really well put together version of the thing you've probably played many times before if you've been playing things in this genre. So you might as well just play something else for a bit. Find a Finnish game to play for the next year if you want to play a sort of medieval city builder. There are lots of them, although lots of them are also in early access, and I've been annoyed by that before. Manor Lords isn't really the last straw. I could easily get fooled again. I'm already ready to get hurt again, guys, by the curse of early access. Who else can recommend a great early access game that's disappointing in some way? Hit me again, I want more of this. Well, anyway, I don't know what I'm talking about, so I might as well just go, and that is my overall review of Manor Lords. You can look at it, but, well, you might as well just leave. Come back later, and there could be a really cool game here, especially if you come back in like 10 years and play Manor Lords 2, where the money and the tech that's gone into this could make something that really is like so good you can't wait to play it, and you have to play it in early access because really you're going to get something special. For now, that's it. However, I am now going to go on and talk about Nebulous Fleet Command next, so maybe I'll rant about early access some more, but in that game I want to rant about how good it looks and how it actually is so special that maybe it is worth playing it even when there's no content whatsoever. We'll see that possible counterexample to this video coming soon. Thanks for watching.